Welcome back to another episode, everyone. I am so grateful today to have the man himself, Dr. Max Doshay. Max is the co-founder and CEO of Monima Behavioral Health, which has Monima Wellness Center for women and also Element Q Healing Center for LGBTQ folks. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. Max, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, TJ. Happy to be here.
My honor. I knew we would get you on the show at some point because I think the obvious question that I have, and I know you get this question a lot, so I just think it'd be fun to lead with it. Okay, Max, because I've heard people ask you, literally overheard this. So, hey, Max, you're a straight guy. Why did you open a women's trauma program followed by an LGBTQ plus trauma-focused mental health program? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially for people like in my personal life. When they hear what I do, it's like, huh, that's an interesting fit. Like I wouldn't have guessed that. And really it comes from my experiences as being a psychologist and like a leader, like doing clinical leadership positions previously at the facility-based level. So kind of the genesis of Monima Behavior Health starts with the genesis of Monima Wellness Center, the women's treatment center. So I used to be the clinical director of a non-gender specific dual diagnosis, run-of-the-mill, well-respected, nonetheless, dual diagnosis addiction residential treatment center.
Yeah.
And it was really, really common for me in my capacity to have female clients come to me and say, hey, Max, I would love to process my trauma history in groups, but I don't feel comfortable processing it in a non-gender specific setting because unfortunately, a lot of my trauma history involves men. Could you refer me to somewhere that is a women's trauma treatment center? And I would think when they would say this, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, like where your head's at. And two, like those places have to exist because it seems like a no-brainer for a safe place for women to process their trauma that's gender specific. That should be an easy find. And, I would talk to my discharge planning and case management team and say like, oh, can you find this? And that place did not exist in San Diego, or just like very few and far between that was insurance-based anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
So it got to this point where like you hear this request enough, you're unable to meet these needs. It's one of those things that instead of complaining about how something doesn't exist, you start it yourself.
Right.
So got together with some individuals I highly respect in the field to form Monima Wellness Center. As a result, it really took off because this space didn't exist as far as a intentionally women's trauma treatment center, that safe space really existing in San Diego. So interesting, similar story with Element Q coming out of running Monima Wellness Center. At Monima Wellness Center, all of our clients are female identifying. And something we just kind of noticed, not that was ever said, for our non-binary individuals and trans women, it felt like we're doing a really good job in treating them, but it feels like we're getting 80% of the way there. Because the experience of a non-binary individual or a trans woman is different than a cisgender female. And so what else is out there for an LGBTQ plus specific outpatient trauma treatment center in San Diego? That didn't exist either. So it was weirdly the exact same kind of process of realizing how something doesn't exist that seems like a no-brainer to me and my partners. It's like, let's create it ourselves and, kind of partnering with you to help open Element Q Healing as a result. And it is unusual that I am the only guy at Monima Wellness Center, and I'm the only straight individual at LMNQ. So I stick out like a sore thumb in both places. And for me, it's like, well, I don't share the same life experiences. You know, I really want to be humble in trying to understand what brings them into treatment and really just to be a safe person
Yeah.
there. Like by no means am I like hiding in a corner in both of these places. Very visible, all the clients know who I am. Um, but yeah, it's about just, approaching the space and what we do with humility and understanding that, I don't know most things and that's okay. Like I'm here to help. I'm here to be a resource. Because at the end of the day, we're here to provide a service that like doesn't exist in our community. Whether it's women's trauma treatment on an outpatient level or LGBTQ plus specific services here in San Diego.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's from this need that you created something, but I also know that you're going to be humble about this, but the reason that I came on board with you and your team is I have such respect for the depth of not only the work that you do and the clinical expertise you bring, but also what you just shared, which is like, I'm going to assemble a team that will actually be, from the community, right? So you have
Yeah.
brought on an incredible team of women, and that has grown over the year and a half. Has it been about a year and a half for Monima Wellness?
Two,
Like,
closing on 2.5 years,
oh
actually.
my gosh,
Yeah.
2.5. I knew I left
Yeah.
a year off.
It's a
Two and a
blur.
half.
It's
Isn't
a
that
blur.
wild? It is a blur. So two and
Yeah.
a half years for Monima Wellness. And then now, with Element Q starting some months back, assembling a team from the community. And
Yeah.
that takes a degree of humility. So I want to acknowledge it. You did use that word, but I know that like I just want to lean into that because
Hmm.
it is really important. We hear this a lot. Someone comes to treatment, like you're talking about the program you were at before. Of course, they were doing amazing clinical work,
Yeah.
but someone
Yeah.
might walk into a group and not feel seen or not feel understood or no one else looks like me, right? And that
Yeah.
that is something that I think is really important. So when it comes to Element Q and assembling a team of people, from the community, there's a lot of layers with that. You and I have had
Yeah.
many conversations about
Hmm.
how, there's a different clinical approach with the L, with the G, with the B, with the T, with the Q, I, A plus, right?
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is. So like to create a diverse team within that umbrella is also interesting.
No, it is. And for me, really the big difference, and you've heard me say this before, it's, there's plenty people in our field providing well-intended care. Like they're doing the best with the training and the resources that we have. And really one of the principles that Element Q and Monima Wellness is built on is how do we transcend from well-intended to intentional? you
Mm,
know, or to go from informed to intentional,
yeah.
or being informed to being centered.
Yes.
Um, and, that's really breaking everything down from the aesthetics to the staffing makeup to how you treat your staff to how you deal with your clients on like a second by second basis. And to me, that's the big difference. And that's something that I'm not capable of doing by myself, nor are you capable of doing by yourself. It's how do we take all of these puzzle pieces together to be as intentional as humanly possible and to also continually ground ourselves in the reality that there may be a different angle we could be looking at this that we're not. So
Yeah.
continuing to collect perspectives and different backgrounds that are specifically meant to serve that community, regardless of what that community is.
We recently did a panel discussion at our Monima monthly event, and so I wanted to kind of like for anyone who hasn't had a chance to see that, I know it's floating out there somewhere on the World Wide Web, but to ask the question because I think this is really important too, and one of the reasons I felt such a strong yes to come work with you all is there's a big difference, and you kind of alluded to it, between trauma informed and trauma focused, like a true
Yeah.
trauma healing program. And, I can think of a handful that exist, and there's some that are doing great work, and yet most are trauma informed, which
Yeah.
just kind of means they're looking at, either addiction or a mental health concern through the possibility that there might be trauma. What
Yes.
we're doing is something really different. So I'd love to hear you break that down a little bit.
Yeah, so trauma centered means like the trauma treatment part is front and center. Yeah, as you said, trauma informed is just we're doing mental health and addiction treatment and we're just holding in the back of our head
Yeah.
that there's a trauma history, which does shape the way we interact with them and treat them. but it's not the front and center thing. And making it the front and center thing means you go about work and the treatment process wildly differently. You know, I use this example all the time. That goes down to the lighting we have in the space. A lot of our clients have trauma, medical related trauma, whether it be, unfortunate experiences with medical providers or being involuntarily hospitalized or just, intense physical health events. So we want to make the space look as unmedical as possible. That goes down to not utilizing fluorescent lighting and things feeling very kind of comfortable and homey.
Yeah.
A trauma-informed program is not taking into account what kind of lights are on
Yeah.
or, what the wallpaper looks like
Right, right, right.
or just, it may seem like we're getting lost in the details, but to do effective, complex trauma treatment, like no stone can be left unturned, which is an exhaustive process, but it's an incredibly rewarding process because that's where you're able to like puncture through those cases where individuals have been cycling through
Yeah.
the behavior health and treatment system because all the surface level stuff has been addressed, but there wasn't this depth of care, this
That's right.
focus
Well, and
that
it's
was
interesting
required to
you
really get to the root.
That's right. And it's interesting you bring that up. I didn't tell you this, but the last time I was facilitating a group at Element Q, a client actually referenced the lighting. And she said, "Oh my gosh, it feels so comfortable in this room. I don't know what it is." And we actually took a minute to talk about it, right? Like
Mhm.
from the furnishings to the lighting. And then she's like, "Oh, that's right. Fluorescent lighting really," her words, "stresses me out." And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, it stresses me out too." And I know, Max, you joke about it. You're like, "Oh, it's so moody in here." But
No, it feels very sleepy around 2 p.m.,
right.
but there is a function to it.
And a very conscious reason. And I think it's interesting because that's a nice segue into something I wanted to talk with you about. Within the LGBTQ plus community specifically, there's a sense in the world, where one might feel safe or unsafe, right? And there's a
Yeah.
lot happening in the world,
Hmm.
depending on one's news and what they digest and where they're
Hmm.
plugged in. There might be something happening in the world that brings on a sense of anxiety. So when they walk into our space, which is a designated space, which would be really different than walking into, a group with mixed people, there are benefits to both, to be clear.
No,
I
there
think there
are.
are
Yeah.
dramatic
Yeah.
benefits to both. But what is it about that safety that's an important first anchor when we're talking about doing this deeper healing in the trauma work?
100%. So individuals with a trauma history, whether it's women or members of the LGBTQ plus community, unfortunately, they can go through life with their baseline being, I feel unsafe.
Right.
Even if they are not literally unsafe in that moment, it's a defense mechanism that terrible, horrible things have happened to them out of nowhere in their past. So in order to prevent them from being caught off guard, they're, hyper vigilant. They're on guard at all times, which is, physically, emotionally, spiritually
Yeah.
exhausting and draining. And, that's really where the mental health struggle and the possible addiction struggle really comes from is the drain from being on guard all the time. So creating a safe space is allowing them to learn how to relax. I mean, to put very basically, and it's what was always a surprise is always a surprise to me is how uncomfortable it can be for an individual with a trauma history to be comfortable.
Yes.
That relaxing comes with fear. Relaxing comes with anxiety and panic because it's like, I've never felt safe anywhere before. Or every time I've kind of like took a breath, this thing came out of nowhere and completely blindsided me, which is why we have to be like down to the detail. Because, yeah, maybe for one person, the fluorescent light was really that trigger. So we have to count for that person. And maybe for another person, I don't know, cheap carpeting, just use like a silly example, but you never know what's going to activate. So how can I be intentionally grounding and relaxing as much as humanly possible? How we talk to them minute by minute.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
how it goes down to how I introduce myself. Like,
yeah.
yes, technically I'm fancy schmancy Dr. Max Doshay. No one calls me doctor anything. I'm just Max. I was told recently that I'm just the guy who aimlessly wanders around. It's like, well, I do a little more than that.
More than that,
But
but
like we
yeah.
want it to feel very like just relaxed and we're just hanging out because we're doing really intense care. And if we haven't like lowered their baseline from a reactivity and relaxation standpoint, it is impossible to do trauma treatment. It's not just hard to do trauma treatment, it's impossible to do it.
That's right. And what's important about what you're saying, I think I want to like kind of lean into this because I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. I think there might be just an assumption that people all want to feel safe and comfortable, and then sometimes we have this nervous system that's on guard. And also, just to bring into the conversation, most of this isn't conscious. I don't think
No,
our clients, nor
no.
was I early in my own trauma healing, walking around thinking I'm afraid of men, which I was. I wasn't even conscious of that, or like certain rooms
Yeah.
activated something within me. So to slow that down, one might assume that that's going to be like this really wonderful experience, which it might be. It can also bring up a lot because, as you said so beautifully, maybe they've never actually felt that safe. And I'm thinking of the first person in my journey when I was 20 years old, 21 years old, and I started working with her. I felt safe for the first time. And although it felt very comforting, and I see that with our clients, and I hope to create that when I'm facilitating a group, I also see sometimes when someone slows down their nervous system enough, these emotions come up that they're not aware of. And that's
Yeah.
why people can get activated in group, for example, something that is seemingly innocuous to someone, but it's something that's really activating for them. Now, I know we could talk for a long time about to activate or not. We don't want to intentionally activate. When someone does get activated, there's something useful there. But
Yeah.
I would love to go a little deeper with what you're saying because I don't hear many people talking about this.
Yeah. I mean, the nervous system relaxation process is a needed thing.
Yeah,
And the clients will say consciously, like, yes, I need this.
right.
But what they don't take into account is there's going to be a lot of weird stuff that comes up.
Yes.
Weird
Clinically
somatic
speaking.
responses, weird emotional
Right.
responses. Just
Right.
I mean, to put it basically, trauma treatment is weird. Uh, I've had people just start like violently burping during EMDR therapy just because when they get to the stage of relaxation, their body just starts responding in the wackiest of ways, which is
Mm.
why we take that integrative approach is, you know, really taking themselves down to a regulated level, give space for their body just to release in a lot of different literal and not like, not literal ways, just release this energy,
Yeah.
which can feel really all over the place if you're just from the outside looking in of like, what is this roller coaster going on here? It's like, well, that's someone who's relaxing for the first time in 30 or 40 years,
Right. Right.
possibly.
And
They're
you,
taking off that mask for that first time in
that's
30 or
right.
40 years. And
And that
all of
mask.
the residual gunk underneath is now showing.
Yeah, and that mask is often, as we've all said, it's like a nervous system. It's an unconscious strategy to try to protect that, right? And that
Yeah,
protector came in for a reason.
it
So
works until it doesn't.
it
Yeah.
works until it doesn't, right? Or it
Yeah.
works, 20% of the time instead of 80% of the time. That's why they
Yeah.
find themselves in treatment. You talked about somatic, and I think it's really important to kind of dive into that. I think, old school trauma was like, let's go back and talk about everything horrible that happened to you and refeel that and release it. And I know we're not there today anymore in trauma healing. And one of the things I love about the work that we do is we focus not exclusively, but at least partially on the somatic. And if anyone doesn't know what that means, it simply means what's stored in the body. And as
Hmm.
we slow down, we start to feel things. If someone's watching or listening right now and unclear what I'm saying, have you ever had a deep tissue massage and just have a wave of emotion? I
Yeah.
remember getting a deep tissue massage and just breaking into tears. It wasn't a memory. I didn't have a memory of that
Yeah.
emotion. It felt literally locked in the muscle tissue.
Hmm.
So I think that's something that's important to talk about as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And especially with like complex trauma cases. And by complex, I don't mean like more acute. It's just
Mhm.
like, it's not as simple as this singular thing happened to me. And that's what I'm processing.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's just growing up in a non-LGBTQ plus affirming environment. That is traumatic, but it's not like one singular thing. It's like a combination of many experiences.
Yeah.
Um, that talk therapy, while it's amazing and is a big part of what we do. I mean, I am a psychologist, so I do see the value in talk therapy. You can't just attack it that way.
Right.
Or that might not be the thing that causes the initial release. That then makes talk therapy way more helpful and productive. Sometimes I cannot count the number of times Dr. Lucy, one of our doctors of Chinese medicine says that someone had like an emotional breakdown while getting acupuncture.
Oh, yeah.
It's not in a bad way, it's a good way of just like literally a thing got poked, quite literally, by a needle and just the whole thing comes unraveled. And therein lies the opening
Yeah.
for talk therapy to be more helpful. I mean, it's why all of our clinicians are also EMDR trained to do something that's not just basic talk therapy as a way in to processing trauma.
That's right.
Because for some people, that will only get to the surface level, is just
Oh,
standard talk therapy. And it's helpful in navigating the here and now, but it's like you're leaving this kind of thorn in them and like
well,
neglecting that. That thorn's still there, even though you put a band-aid on top of it, it's still poking.
yeah, and then we're only looking at, like you said, like the behaviors of now, and we don't really shift the behaviors of now in any significant way unless we get down to those thorns, right?
Oh, it's impossible. Yeah.
Because the unconscious beliefs and ideas I have about myself and the world will continue to replicate over and over and over again. That's why we might call it karma, but it's really just me seeing myself and having that same frequency and the same things trapped in my body. And I relate to this in my own journey too, because in my early 20s, my early recovery, I was in talk therapy and I discovered the patterns and I knew where they were rooted and I knew, what had happened and why I was doing this, but it didn't mean I could actually change anything. So, with my model of conscious recovery, especially in the groups, it's all about psychodynamic because something happens when someone feels or experiences something. Because, a lot of treatment is psychoeducational, right? We try to teach
Yeah.
our clients things. And that's,
Yeah.
like you said, it's important,
It's
but it only
needed.
takes
Yeah.
us so far.
Yeah. No, it is needed 100%. And, it's also recognizing that everyone's inroad into healing is going to be wildly different person to person.
That's right.
And, and we don't know what that inroad's going to be, or the client themselves doesn't know what's going to
Right.
be to no fault of their own. So that's why I think integrative and holistic care is so important in behavioral health. And what bothers me to no end is like how the word holistic has been kind of it's like monetized almost, or like redefined. What holistic means is like for some providers, holistic means I did yoga one time,
Right.
and this is the difference between being trauma informed and trauma centered, or the difference between being well intended and intentional.
Yes.
1 to 2 hours every single day a client is here is somatic based.
Yeah.
And even within the more traditional psychoeducational stuff, there's even a variety within that.
Yeah.
So, truly being holistic and integrative in this very intentional, conscientious way, and not just throwing in a random sound healing session just because we'll see what happens.
Right. Because
Um,
that's the thing that makes us holistic, right?
Yeah, you
And
did it one time, or it's like or just haphazardly putting things in there, and clients like it. It's not like it's doing anything harm.
harm, right.
You're just not getting the full benefit of the experience. Like our schedule is very laid out of like what comes after what, and like the whole sequencing aspect of it.
That's right.
Oh, we know they're doing EMDR at 10:30 on Tuesday. Let's have their acupuncture at 11:30 on Tuesday. And like it's all, I mean, it's a nightmare for a clinical director to schedule, but that's what's needed in order to like successfully move people through complex trauma treatment is being intentional and granular. And
Yeah.
it's a lot, but it's 100% worth it when you see the outcome.
Yeah, and true holistic, just to like, sort of recap that, true holistic treatment is treating the whole person, really. It's
Yes.
using an integrative approach. And I remember on my snarkier moments, I'm like, if I see one more treatment center that has holistic and integrative treatment on their card, but I love asking them, what does that mean? And not in a way of like, gotcha, but in a way of curiosity of
Yeah.
like,
What do you
what
mean
does
by
it
it?
actually mean? And like holistic and integrative treatment, I think about it from the four rooms, physical, intellectual, emotional, and
Yeah.
spiritual. Like, are we addressing all of that? We're not like a box with sides. We're a truly integrated human. And you said something that I think is really important. So I want to go back to it. And this is what I call clinical humility. And that is, we don't know what the thing is going to be. And
No,
I
until
have
it
no
happens. No idea.
idea in a
Yeah.
group, this one thing, or in an individual session or in an acupuncture session, the one thing that is going to open something up for someone. And I mean, I know for myself, I used to be the person they called in when a client was emotionally dysregulating, meaning they were losing their, SHIT. And they were
Mm.
like, packing their bags and leaving treatment or whatever it was. And one of the things I would use as a mantra to myself is what they're upset about is not what they're upset about.
No. Yeah.
I wonder what it is.
Yeah.
Being in that curiosity, and then they can discover that for themselves. Because as you said, they don't usually know because they're in an automatic response.
Yeah, and that's where I think that cognitive flexibility is so needed in trauma treatment, of not having this ascribed like A happens, then B happens, then C happens, and D happens. It's a lot of go with the flow. It's kind of like this almost like kung fu approach of
Mhm.
like you're not attacking anything, you're taking the energy that's coming in and repurposing it in a productive way.
Yeah.
That's really what all of this is about. It's, we're doing trauma kung fu. Um,
I love it.
um, and yeah, it's unpredictable in nature, but at the end of the day, we just got to trust the process. And that's something you hear ad nauseum here at Element Q and then at Monima Wellness. As far as it may not be clear now what A, B, and C is, but let's just go through this process and see what comes up.
Yeah, and through compassionate curiosity, that's my new thing
Yes.
I've been saying the
Yeah.
last few days for some reason, because there's curiosity, like, oh, I wonder what that is. But compassionate curiosity to me is like, let me be a space, the most overused term, holding space, but it is so important. And what does it mean so that the client can have the insight that can be a starting point or the opening, as you said, like something opens, that can be the beginning of a whole new pathway for them because ultimately the answers are within the individual, but they're also coming to us at the most, possibly the most difficult time of their life, or the most
Yeah.
confused, or the
Yeah.
most, they're feeling ill-equipped to move forward. So we have this profound role, but I think a lot of clinicians think it's my job to figure out what's going on with the client and tell them. And I know that's a very old school approach, and we're light years from that.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not Sherlock Holmes. Like we're not trying to like solve a puzzle or solve a mystery. It's like we just want to be there alongside them as they walk through this journey of processing days, months, years, decades of trauma, depression, anxiety, whatever the mental health concern may be, addiction, you know. It's how can we walk alongside them in a way in which they feel seen, heard, and most importantly, safe.
Yeah. And then they start to look at internal safety, which is what our hope is for them as they
Yeah.
walk out our door, right? Because I think, more of an old school approach, and again, there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but like they wanted clients to leave with tools. Well,
Yeah.
tools are great, but like inner resources are much more powerful, right? And in a very overly simplistic way, because Max, I like very simple. If a client can just be with themselves, that there's that impulse to leave, there's that impulse. One of the things I love about what we do too, and it's not very many programs do it, is literally have a triage person sitting on the other side of that door. And let me tell you, when I'm facilitating a group, I am not as concerned when a client, gets, activated, they're going to walk out that door and have someone to hold them. That if they can stay there for a minute, that may be the most someone's done in
Yeah.
20 years. I
Yeah.
mean, I think about how I was running from myself for decades until I learned how to slow down. And like, there's something so powerful in that process that really wasn't an awareness or a tool. It was learning how to be with myself in a new way.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part about trauma treatment, and use unfortunate kind of that word kind of sarcastically, in that this process doesn't feel good.
Right.
And often we find ourselves in these circumstances because of that avoidance of not feeling good, or because you are avoiding like traumatic
Yeah.
experiences. I get it. I would get why someone would want to avoid that.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, we're working with a lot of heaviness here.
Yeah.
And once again, how do we, back to the Kung Fu thing, how do we work with this energy instead of just trying to repel it?
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, working with it takes a lot of trust and buy-in by both the provider, like us, and the client themselves. And if they don't feel safe, now we're back to the lighting. If you don't feel safe in the space that you're doing it, that's impossible. We're
Yeah.
just going to repel or
We're
attempt to repel.
As we move into our last few minutes, I want to kind of pivot a little bit because another thing that I really appreciate about, the depth of trauma work is the clinicians and the support staff. We're holding a lot as well. And I don't think,
Yeah.
I like to be bold and say, I don't think anyone comes into this work without our own degree of trauma. Why else would we be doing this, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a call to it, whether it's someone in our
Yeah.
family or our own journey. And so things show up for us as well, too. And,
Mhm.
one of the questions I have for you, and this can kind of be our closing conversation in the last few minutes, how do we support ourselves and each other? Like, what does a truly, maybe not healthy, functional team look like? Because I've worked in teams where they say things like, this is really safe. This is clinical supervision. You can talk about
Mhm.
anything, but you really
Mhm.
couldn't. And then
Yeah.
I've worked with other teams, and I'll shout out my friend Melissa Stevenson, who's absolutely amazing. She's now in private practice in San Diego, but I worked with her for years as the director, and she created a true safe space where we could talk about all of our transference, countertransference, everything that was
Yeah.
coming up.
Yeah. I mean, it's acknowledging kind of piggybacking on what I just said about the clients, like this process isn't enjoyable from like a isn't emotionally feel good as you're going through it, but it's recognizing that being around someone in crisis processing trauma responses are contagious. And one of my big areas of research is vicarious traumatization in healthcare providers. How, as a healthcare provider, I can develop PTSD symptoms
That's right.
from hearing someone process their trauma. Because that energy, it's an emotional contagion, is kind of the word used in the literature. Like PTSD is contagious, as weird as that sounds. Um, and it's acknowledging that's happening to our staff and not just our therapists and psychologists, but like anyone. Like we're in sitting in a space, sitting in an environment where heavy stuff is happening. So how can we consciously A, accept that, and B, counteract that and adapt in a way that we're acknowledging that our staff is going through this with the client? How can we be supportive on the other end? Um, and that comes down to me as the CEO, how I conduct myself in this space. I say all the time, I take our work here and my work that I do insanely seriously. But as I'm sure you are aware of at this point, TJ, I do not take myself remotely seriously
That's right.
whatsoever.
Yes.
Um, and like it's how can I inject levity into this space, not just for the staff, but also for the clients too.
Yeah.
Like how can we experience joy and pleasure and have fun?
Mhm.
Because the work that we're doing is really heavy
Yeah.
and intense. And I think it's also approaching the staff from the standpoint that they are going to be negatively impacted
Yeah.
by the work that happens here. Not wondering if it's going to. You give them the space of, I know it is.
Right.
So let's talk about it.
That's right.
So they know that that's a valid, it's acceptable, doesn't mean they're doing something wrong or they're not meant to be in this field of like, hey, we're going to pick up on the energy of what's happening in this space. What are you doing to take care
Yeah.
of yourself?
Oh my gosh, I'm thinking about being early in the field and what you just said. It just literally, I felt it in my body. It's like I was terrified that I wasn't qualified to do this work because of what we're talking about. And when I understood, like, not only am I going to feel the energy, but it's going to also push up against and touch things within me. And
Yeah,
that had became a process over the first few years of working in the field to realize not only is that quote unquote normal, but it's really useful and
it
useful
is.
in the way that the more aware I am of what's getting touched, obviously I don't share that verbally with the client, but the more I'm aware with that, the less it gets in the way, right? So,
Yes.
and then of course, the cliche, but I still believe it's true. The only thing I really need to do for my client is my own healing. So, doing my own therapy, doing my own healing processes and practices is so important.
Yeah, and that's why we really emphasize staff wellness here because we're going to be worse therapists or we're going to be worse, you know, behavioral healthcare providers in this field or staff members if if we're not taking care of our stuff
That's right.
first and foremost. And yeah, many of us, or most of us, or even I would dare say all of us in this field, have our own baggage, and that's not just limited to us who work in the behavioral healthcare community. It's part of the human condition that you have some
Correct.
sort of
Right.
baggage, regardless of
Right.
where you are. So, what is it? How does it show up? And how does it shape the way you interact with clients or shape the way that you internally respond to what the clients
That's right.
are bringing in?
I
Like,
think we
it's
could,
there, it's a thing. Let's
yeah.
talk about it and not shoving it to a closet in the back of our head and pretending it doesn't
That's
exist.
right. And I think you and I could do an entire 30 minutes on this topic alone. Maybe we will one day, but like the old
Mhm.
school way is kind of to bury that. I mean, people were literally taught. I hear that some people, especially like substance use counselors, are still being taught to leave your stuff at the door and it's waiting for you when you get back. I'm like, oh, can we please have a different way of working with this? But uh,
Yeah.
so I'm going to ask you in a moment if you have any closing thoughts. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we just got started on some things. So
Mhm.
perhaps in a while, it would be great to have you back on the show, Max. But is there anything you want to say in closing?
And I do not have any magical epiphanies or inspirational quotes. It's just like honored that I've been let in and accepted in the space where I'm the one outlier, regardless of where I am. And honestly, it's given me a very unique perspective that in most of my life, I am one of many. And, at both Element Q and Monima Wellness, I'm one of one.
Right.
And it's really informed a lot in just the way I go about things, both clinically and just in my own personal life. So honored to be led in and trusted by both the clients and staff members alike to put up with me all this time.
Well, I love that. That's such a great way to close this conversation. So, everyone, Max's bio will be in the show notes. Also, you can learn more about our programs in the show notes, of course. And then I will say, as I always do, if you've enjoyed this episode, if there's someone that comes to mind, who comes to mind that you think might benefit from this, or it might be a conversation that they would enjoy, please share this. Please like and subscribe. Thank you, everyone. Until the next time. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.